Niccolo Machiavelli once watched kings fall not because enemies were stronger, but because their own minds were weaker. He wrote it in blood 500 years ago. The world does not reward the loud, the busy, or the distracted. It rewards the man who controls his own attention like a prince controls his territory. You think you're behind in life because you're not talented enough. Machiavelli would laugh at that excuse. You're behind because something or someone has been quietly stealing the one resource that actually builds empires: your focus. Stay for the next few minutes. What Machiavelli understood about the mind is more dangerous and more useful than anything a self-help guru will ever tell you. Because here's what nobody tells you about power. It was never really about armies. It was never really about money, or bloodlines, or luck. Machiavelli spent his entire exile writing one message to anyone who would listen: the throne belongs to the man who can rule himself first. Every other victory is borrowed until that one is won. He watched brilliant men lose everything, not to smarter rivals, but to their own unguarded minds. And he watched ordinary men, with no name and no army, quietly outlast princes who inherited everything and protected nothing. If that sounds like your life right now, full of ambition, empty of results, keep watching. This is the part of Machiavelli nobody puts in the history books. The prince always knows his territory. Machiavelli didn't waste ink on dreamers. He wrote for men who wanted to actually rule something: a city, a court, a life. His first rule was brutal in its simplicity. A ruler who doesn't know exactly what he wants will be ruled by everyone who does. Most people wander through their days reacting. A notification here, an opinion there, 100 tiny surrenders that feel like nothing. Machiavelli called this the fatal weakness of the common man, mistaking motion for command. The prince is different. Before he moves a single soldier, he knows the exact hill he intends to take. Every resource, every hour, every ally exists to serve that single ambition. Never was anything great achieved without danger, and nothing was ever achieved without direction, either. Ask yourself the Machiavellian question. Right now, what hill am I actually trying to take? If you can't answer instantly, you already know why your enemy's distraction, comfort, other people's demands keep winning. Picture two rulers inheriting neighboring cities on the same morning. The first spends his week answering petitions, settling small disputes, reacting to whatever noise reaches the palace gates first. He ends every day exhausted, and his borders haven't moved an inch. The second ruler locks his war room, studies the map, and decides before anyone else speaks a word to him exactly which territory he intends to hold by winter. A year later, historians don't remember the first ruler's exhaustion. They only remember that he had none of the second ruler's kingdom. Machiavelli saw this pattern repeat itself across every court he studied. Motion without direction isn't ambition, it's just anxiety wearing armor. And the man who mistakes his packed schedule for a plan is the easiest kind of enemy to defeat, because he's already defeating himself. 2. Vert is not a gift. It is a weapon you forge. Machiavelli had a word the English language never fully translated. Vert. Not virtue in the soft moral sense, but raw capability. Willpower sharpened into a blade. He believed no prince was born with vert. It was built, strike by strike. The same way a swordsman builds a scar tissue of skill through 1,000 repeated cuts. Here is the part that should unsettle you. Every time you let your attention slip, every scroll, every excuse, every "I'll focus tomorrow," you are training weakness into your own character. Machiavelli watched noble houses collapse this way, not through invasion, but through habitual softness. And the opposite is equally true. Every time you finish what you started before chasing the next shiny thing, you forge virtù. You are, quite literally, building the mind of a ruler, one decision at a time. The tragedy isn't lacking discipline. The tragedy is not realizing you've been practicing its enemy for years. Machiavelli studied Cesare Borgia, the way a swordsmith studies a blade, not because Borgia was flawless, but because Borgia understood something almost no one else in Renaissance Italy grasped. Virtù had to be exercised daily, or it dulled like any weapon left unused in a damp cellar. Consider the mercenary captains of that era, men who inherited fortresses and titles from their fathers. Most lost everything within a generation, not because enemies were smarter, but because comfort had already softened them before the first cannon ever fired. Machiavelli wrote about their collapse almost with pity, men destroyed not by war, but by their own idle years. You are building or dismantling your own virtù right now, in this very moment. Based on whether you finish this video with a plan or close the tab and open another distraction. There is no neutral ground here. Machiavelli never believed in neutral ground. Every hour either arms you or disarms you. The 3, fortune favors the man who denies her power. Machiavelli believed half of life was fortuna, the wild, unpredictable current that no man controls. But he refused to let men hide behind it. Fortune is the ruler of half of our actions, he wrote, but she still leaves the other half, or thereabouts, to be governed by us. That other half? Attention, discipline, choice. The men who blamed fortune for their failures were, in Machiavelli's eyes, cowards dressed as victims. The men who built dams against her floods, who prepared before the storm arrived, were the ones history remembered as princes instead of peasants. Every distraction you entertain is you handing your half of the river over to fortune. Every hour you protect is a dam you build with your own hands. Machiavelli used a vivid image for this: a violent river that floods the plains, tears down trees, and buries houses whenever it rises unchecked. But in calm seasons, wise men build dikes and channels, so that when the flood eventually comes, it finds a controlled path instead of open, defenseless land. Most people wait for the flood before they think about the dam. They wait for the crisis, the deadline, the diagnosis, the layoff, before they consider what discipline might have prepared them for. Machiavelli had no sympathy for this approach. He believed the calm season was the only season that mattered, because it was the only one you were free to use wisely. The prince who built during peacetime wasn't lucky when the storm came. He was simply the only one still standing to be called lucky. IV. The enemy wears a friendly face. Machiavelli warned that the most dangerous enemies rarely announce themselves at the gate. They slip in disguised as friends, as favors, as harmless little requests. Your modern gate is guarded far worse than any Renaissance city. A single glowing screen invites 100 invaders a day, each one small, each one just a minute. Each one bleeding you of the hours a prince would have spent building his fortress. Machiavelli also knew the enemy inside the walls was worse than the one outside them. Fear of failure, hunger for approval, the endless comparison to rival courts. These traitors whisper caution when boldness is required, and they whisper indulgence when discipline is required. He didn't ask you to destroy these instincts. He asked you to govern them the way a prince governs a court full of men who would betray him the instant he looked away. Think about how a Renaissance court actually operated. Advisors smiled while calculating your downfall. Allies pledged loyalty while negotiating with your enemies in the same breath. Machiavelli's genius wasn't paranoia, it was refusing to be naive about which relationships deserved his trust and which merely deserved his attention. Your phone is that court now. Every app competing for your focus has hired the finest strategists money can buy. Engineers studying your exact psychological weaknesses the way old spies once studied a rival prince's habits. They don't want your money first. They want your attention. Because they know attention is the treasury every other kingdom is built on. Machiavelli would not tell you to smash the phone in outrage. He'd tell you to treat it exactly like a court full of flatterers welcome. Useful, but never ever unsupervised. V. Conquer in silence. Then let the world notice the image of Machiavelli that survives is theatrical poison, betrayal, palace intrigue. But read closer, and you find a much quieter obsession, preparation done where no one is watching. He praised princes who trained their armies in peacetime, who studied history alone at night, who built alliances years before they were needed. Their triumphs looked sudden to outsiders. They weren't. They were the final visible inch of a much longer invisible campaign. This is the part modern culture refuses to teach you. Greatness is not a lightning strike. It is a siege, slow, patient, and glamorous that only looks instant to the people who weren't paying attention to the years before it. Every uninterrupted hour you spend on your craft, unseen and unapplauded, is a soldier added to your army. Machiavelli would tell you, stop waiting for applause before you start building. The applause comes after the empire, never before it. He wrote The Prince itself in exactly this spirit alone. Stripped of his political office, largely ignored by the very rulers he addressed. He didn't write it for the recognition of his own generation. He wrote it with the discipline of a man who understood his real audience was history itself, and history rewards patience far more often than it rewards urgency. Compare that to how most ambitions die today. Someone starts a project, receives no immediate praise, and quietly abandons it within a month, not because the idea was weak, but because the ego expected a coronation before it had even finished laying the foundation stones. Machiavelli's princes didn't operate this way. They built roads no traveler noticed for years. They trained soldiers no enemy saw until the day of battle. Silence was never emptiness to them. It was the exact shape of preparation. VI. Discipline over mood. The prince does not ask permission from his feelings. Machiavelli had no patience for princes who ruled by whim. A court run on mood is a court already conquered. He believed the strongest leaders built systems so their empire didn't collapse the moment their motivation did. Routines, fixed hours, repeated rituals that made the right decision the automatic one, not the negotiated one. This is Machiavellian discipline in its purest form. You do not ask your feelings whether today is a good day to work. You simply work, because the prince who waits for inspiration is a prince who has already lost his throne to the rival who didn't. Every promise you break to yourself is a small rebellion inside your own kingdom. Enough rebellions, and you stop believing your own decrees. Machiavelli knew that a ruler who cannot trust himself cannot rule anything at all. He observed something almost mathematical about weak rulers. They governed by mood, and their kingdoms reflected it, prosperous one season, chaotic the next. Entirely dependent on the ruler's temperament rather than any lasting structure. Their subjects never knew which version of the prince would greet them, and uncertainty like that eventually breeds rebellion. Strong rulers offered something far more valuable than charisma. They offered consistency. Their court knew exactly what to expect. Because the ruler's decisions weren't hostage to his emotions. This predictability wasn't boring. Machiavelli considered it one of the rarest and most commanding qualities a leader could possess. Build that same predictability into your own days, and something remarkable happens. The people around you stop wondering whether today's version of you will follow through. You become in the truest Machiavellian sense, a ruler who can actually be trusted, starting with yourself. 7. When the empire burns rule from the ashes, every prince Machiavelli studied eventually lost a battle. Cities were sacked, allies betrayed them, fortune turned her wheel without warning. What separated the princes who returned to power from the ones erased by history wasn't the absence of disaster. It was what they did in the 10 seconds after disaster struck. Machiavelli despised the ruler who collapsed into self-pity, who let one lost battle convince him the whole war was over. He respected the ruler who studied the wreckage coldly, extracted the lesson, and marched again before the enemy could celebrate. He who wishes to be obeyed must know how to command, and he who wishes to rise again must know how to look at failure without flinching. Your setbacks are not verdicts. They are intelligence reports. Read them like Machiavelli read a battlefield without emotion, only strategy. Machiavelli himself lived this lesson in the harshest way possible. He was arrested, tortured, and exiled from the city he had served for years, stripped of every title, every influence, every ounce of the status he had spent a career building. Most men would have surrendered to bitterness and never written another word. Instead, from a small farmhouse outside Florence, stripped of power and largely forgotten by the court he once served, he produced the very text that would make his name outlast every prince he ever advised. His downfall didn't end his story. It became the chapter that made the rest of it possible. That's the real Machiavellian secret about failure. It only becomes permanent the moment you decide to stop studying it and start hiding from it instead. V8. Design the court so temptation has no seat at the table. Machiavelli understood something modern willpower culture still hasn't caught up to. The strongest prince doesn't rely on resisting temptation. He removes temptation from the room entirely. He advised rulers to exile dangerous influences before they could whisper in the king's ear, not because the king lacked strength, but because no man wins 100 small battles a day forever. Eventually, exhaustion opens the gate. Translate that into your own life, and it becomes a blueprint. Silence the noise before it reaches you. Build the room, the morning, the schedule where the disciplined choice is also the easiest one. A prince who spends his strength resisting doesn't have strength left to build. IX. Let rivals underestimate the quiet ones. Machiavelli noticed something rulers rarely admitted out loud. The prince everyone underestimated usually outlasted the prince everyone feared. Loud ambition invites rivals. It announces your target before you've secured it, and gives every competing court time to prepare a defense. Machiavelli favored a quieter kind of hunger, the ruler who let his results speak first, and his intentions stay guarded until the moment they no longer needed protecting. This wasn't deception for its own sake. It was strategy. A man who broadcasts every goal to friends, family, and followers gets applause for the announcement and often loses the very motivation that was supposed to fuel the actual work. The dopamine of being seen as ambitious quietly replaces the discomfort of becoming ambitious. Machiavelli's princes rarely explain themselves until the outcome made explanation unnecessary. Let your rivals and even your doubters underestimate what you're building in silence. History remembers the empire, never the warning speech that preceded it. X. Identity is the only crown no one can steal. Machiavelli's final, quietest lesson is the one people miss entirely. He didn't just want princes who acted powerful. He wanted men who had become, in their bones, the kind of person power naturally follows. Not I'm trying to focus, but I am a man who commands his own attention. Not I hope to build something, but I am someone who builds, regardless of mood, regardless of fortune, regardless of applause. This is the difference between borrowing discipline and owning it. Machiavelli watched kingdoms rise from men who simply decided, quietly and completely, who they were going to be long before the world agreed with them. Closing the Prince's final warning, Machiavelli never promised an easy path. He promised something better, a true one. He would tell you this, standing over 5 centuries of watching men rise and fall. No enemy. If this way of thinking hits something in you, that's exactly the kind of mind this channel was built for. Every week, we take history's sharpest, most feared thinkers, Machiavelli, and the strategists who studied power like a science and turned their psychology into something you can actually use in your own life. So if you want more of this, hit subscribe, tap that notification bell so you don't miss the next one, and drop a comment telling me which prince, which philosopher, or which mind you want broken down next. The empire you're building starts with the next decision you make after this video ends. Choose it wisely, and I'll see you in the next one.